This is chapter 8, Connecticut. So after I left New York, my mother, she moved to Connecticut, Danbury, Connecticut to be exact. And it sucked. I really didn't want to leave my hometown. I didn't want to leave my friends behind. The people that I thought that were my friends. I didn't want to leave that behind. And I didn't realize that until time passed by. Yeah. So we get there, move to a nice community, much better than where we were at before. It was peaceful, it was quiet, and me being from the Bronx, I came there and caused havoc and mayhem by default. I remember when I first went to that apartment complex, I was stealing people's bikes, taking them on joyrides. I wouldn't consider it theft though because I brought it back, you know. But that's the type of shenanigans that I was getting into. And I also met a group of individuals that I became friends with over time. There was a kid there, I'm not gonna say his name, but I'll give these guys nicknames. The first one that I really became tight with, his name is Suspect. And the reason I call him Suspect is because his behavior changed when other people were around. So, matter of fact, I call him Chameleon. Basically his color changed depending on his environment. Me and him became really close. We built a rapport and became tight. We were hanging out every day. And when I arrived to Connecticut, I was actually able to work on my craft as far as music. I started going to the studio more often. At least every week or every other week, I was going to the studio, just perfecting my pen. And being around him, motivated me to do it. And he wasn't rapping yet, but he always wanted to do it, so we put our minds together and we were doing our thing. And when I moved to Connecticut, the violence didn't stop because I decided to get involved in situations that I didn't have to. I actually got arrested for the first time in Connecticut. I never got arrested in the Bronx for everything that I did. It was clean. But when I came to Connecticut, I was arrested for something that I had nothing to do with. I just showed up to the crime and we got arrested. They arrested us because they assumed that we were accomplices to something, but we were just witnesses, and they just charged all of us. And then I got a year probation, for that. For some friends getting involved in some, ruckus. They got physical with a group. Not even a group, it was one person. They were just, jumping on them. And we told them to hop in the whip and we was trying to leave, and police stopped us, searched us, and arrested us. That was the first time I was in a holding cell. And it was on the day of my girlfriend's birthday. So that was crazy. And it was cold. After that, I never wanted to see a jail cell. And I always thank God that the judge didn't, prosecute us and make me face that, especially for something I didn't do. He could have though if he wanted to. He could have told me a hard lesson. But those documents been expunged and my record is clean. And I'm thankful. I was able to, start over. So in the middle of making music and getting into fights, that's what I was doing out there. Um, um,
And then this way there's a side trail, and I don't know where that goes.
and when I was in Connecticut, I also was working. I worked multiple jobs. I even put on an Easter Bunny costume, seasonal job. That was the first time I done something like that. It was sweaty, it was stinky, it was being passed around, you know. But I had to do what I had to do to hustle to maintain my lifestyle. You know. I worked at least 10 jobs in Connecticut. I worked at Buffalo Wild Wings. That was the job that I stayed at for a year. That was the job where I was consistent and, I became who I became. That was the longest job I ever held, working at Buffalo Wild Wings. I was a host. I worked as a night auditor at the Hampton Inn, being a receptionist. I also worked at Planet Fitness overnight. I worked at Target overnight. A lot of overnight jobs. BJ's. I even worked at the deli at Stu Leonard's. That's a supermarket. I worked as a bouncer in the club. I was just, juggling, And then after a while, I became an entrepreneur. I created my own business called Dice Studios LLC, where I made tons of money. And just for, my protection, I can't explain in full detail of how I made this lump sum of money that changed my life, because I know it can always be used against me. I don't believe in that statute of limitations. Anything I will say will be used against me in the court of law. So I can't say everything that I participated in, but I made a lot of money, and I even thought about, getting real estate. With the money that I was getting, I was able to travel across the country. Well, I was traveling the East Coast. I was traveling from, Connecticut to New York regularly, even Jersey, and started going down south, going to Georgia, going to Florida. I have people out there that I needed to see. So I was, doing my thing, with my group. But I had to leave and hit the refresh button, hit the restart, and change my path, because the friends that I thought that were my friends were showing sides of envy and jealousy. So, I put people in situations to change their life. I made a lot of money. I put people in situations where, they made a lot of money because of me. And, I have the right to feel how I feel about the situation. I'm not as angry as I was, because if I was that angry like I was, I'd probably be in jail. And, that's why I had to leave. It's painful to think about, because I was a loyal guy. I was the boss. You could say I was the connect of Connecticut. Yeah. I was going all through Connecticut, doing what I was doing to survive. And where I was at, everybody was cool with each other as far as they'll be cool and, you know, sneak talk and, you know, sneak this behind your back and not be upfront. You know, I'm from New York. I'm from the Bronx. If you got something to say, you tell that man, and that's what we did coming up. But when I came to Connecticut, it was more like, you know, the West Coast is motherfuckers aren't gonna tell you how they feel about you. They'll rather tell somebody else, and then you hear it from them, and it's like, oh, word, that's how you feel, you know. But they never brought it to me, you know. And I'm gonna say this too. Luckily, when I found these things out, I wasn't carrying a firearm, you know. But you know, I got my license in Connecticut, so you know, I was able to carry. But it's a good thing that, you know, I wasn't carrying at that time because, like I said, you know, the people I was around and the things that, you know, I was privy to, and, you know, being involved in the street to a degree, I would have just, you know, crashed. You know, that's what would have happened otherwise, man. You know, just instincts, you know, sometimes it's like you feel like you have to kill to survive. You know, like it's kill or be killed. It's a jungle. And you see where I'm at. I'm in nature. Survival instincts kick in. And, you know, that's how I was feeling.